live bait muskie fishing has been an obsession for a long time, and building the best mousetrap has just been a perpetual exercise in trying to figure out the best way to do it. Now, the real secret to successful live bait muskie fishing is having really active bait. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is obviously taking really good care of your bait and getting fresh bait. But then secondly is not stressing it. One of the biggest stressors is putting hooks into the minnows that you're fishing with. So to me, the less you can stick hooks into a fish, the better that sucker is going to perform, and also the better your hooking percentage is going to be. So the latest live bait quick strike rig that I've come up with involves no hooks in the sucker minnow that you're fishing with. So here's how it works. It's a bridle system, which most live bait muskie fishermen are familiar with. I'm using just a small rubber band here and a bait needle. Now for this exercise, I'll just use a big piece of rubber here. So what I would do is I'd slide a larger rubber band the same diameter as the girth of the sucker up the line. So this would be up on my main line. And then I'd go ahead and I'd run a bridle through the nose of the sucker minnow. And to start that, I'm going to have, of course, a clip on my main line here. And the wire that I use as my leader for this, I like 30-pound titanium. This is a much lighter system than most guys use. I know a lot of guys are using really heavy stuff, heavy sticks. I prefer to fish for muskies with live bait just like you would fish for walleyes with a live bait rig. It's a longer, softer rod where you let the fish just kind of load up and they hook themselves. So here's how I do it. I'm just going to take this live bait needle here. I'm going to run it through the nostrils. If this was a sucker, I would just run it through the nostrils. So I'll run it through the nostrils here. I'm going to pull this baby through. I'm going to get it tight, and then I'm just going to go ahead and clip that rubber band. I'll end up looping it around a couple times just so it's nice and snug and secure on there. So get this baby on there like so. Pop that out. This down. I kind of got butterfingers here. So once that's on, you can see the rubber band is in place there. Now this is where having the rubber band above on the main line comes into play. So I'll drop this rubber band down. This goes over the sucker. Now this might seem a little complicated. Once you've done it a couple times, it's super easy. So this just goes over the sucker like so. And now I've got a VMC. This is a 96-17. I use 3/0, 4/0, and 5/0 size hooks. I like that longer shank. And I just use the size of the hook is dependent on the size of the bait that I'm fishing. You can see, if you look at this, I bent these hooks slightly out so they're not going to make contact with the sucker minnow. And I'll show you once that's on there. But now I just take this little wire shank that I've put on the end of it, run it up through here, and I'll see how that's just going to run right along the side of the sucker. And then I'll clip that little loop that I made on the end into here. So now, as you can see, I've got this is the whole system. I can pull the bait through the water, no problem, but now watch, even if a muskie grabbed this bait and I start to pull, you can see how that hook is sliding instantly, and it doesn't take much pressure for this thing just to pop. So there's no hooks in the sucker's completely free. If a muskie does grab it, it's no pressure at all before I start driving the hooks home, and all I have to do is slowly load the rod and pull. I'm not dropping slack in the line and snapping it where I've got a chance for failure or things flying out. Once the fish is swimming away, it's really easy. The fish just hook themselves, everything breaks free. You come in, pop the hook out of the corner of the fish's mouth, and it's, to me, a remarkable system. Now you've got your sucker hook, there's a number of different ways to deploy it into the water and how you want to fish it. So a lot of times if we've got multiple anglers in the boat and we're fishing deep water, we're going to want to fish a bait or two that's essentially directly below the boat. That's when you want to use a really heavy sinker and you want it to be pegged. Now whatever weight I'm using for sucker fishing, I always have these weights fixed. I don't want them sliding. I want really good direct contact with the weight. It just seems like it makes the system work a lot better. However, if I want to get the bait away from the boat, I employ a weighting system similar to what you do if you were steelhead fishing. I do this a lot of times in rivers, and it's taking the same weight. Let's just say I needed 1 1/4 ounce weight to bring a sucker down to the depth I wanted it to be. I would take that same 1 1/4 ounce and I would spread it out over 3 different sized weights. And I'd start with, I'd have them just slightly different sizes. So I might use 3/8 and 1/4 essentially to get that weight. So I'd start with a 3/8 in the front, another 3/8 and then a 1/4. And I'd use tungsten, and tungsten is such an important tool for live bait fishing. I'm telling you, it's worth the money to invest in tungsten for this, because not only is it dense, but you can feel when you're making contact with cover. The tungsten is going to be the first thing to contact cover. And if you're pulling baits, you can feel it hit, and spreading the weight out over, say, 3 or 4 feet in your line, pegging it with just bass pegging sinkers like this, just makes the whole system work really well. The sucker isn't making dynamic moves when you're lifting your rod up and down. Everything flows really smooth. It's a really, really big deal, especially when you're river fishing. Now, some guys will sucker fish with no strike indicator at all, for example, and that's what I'm doing almost exclusively when I'm river fishing. If I'm lake fishing, often you're doing a little bit of both, where you're fishing a cork or maybe a board. Now, here's one tip that I've figured for cork fishing. A lot of guys will tie traditional slip float, but if you don't want to slip float anymore, you can't just take your slip float off. So I'm using these little offshore clips, and I'll simply clip that onto the line, and then I can set whatever depth I want it to be. And you can reel, when you're fishing musky stuff, you can reel this thing right through the line, or have somebody pop it off with a board. And the other thing we've been learning about to be extremely effective if you're fishing shallower for muskies is board fishing. This is a great way to spread out over a greater distance, and it just seems to work extremely well, from these little crappie size boards to the walleye size boards. It's a great way to cover some water. So the thing about live bait rigging for muskies, there's so many different ways to do it, but one thing I will just say is most important is having good, healthy, active bait is certainly the key to catching fish.